So what I've been doing over the last few weeks is gradually working my way through quite an extensive set of teachings given by the Buddha, known as the Mangala Sutta, or the Sutta on Blessings of Life. And the big picture is that those blessings of life are 38 in all, and they start with ones which are fairly obvious, and they work towards ones that are more esoteric. And by pretty obvious, I mean the sort of thing which would be helpful even to a person who is completely clueless about how to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps in life. So if you imagine like a young, impressionable child, or a person who really has no idea about what is right or wrong in life, then these might be candidates who would benefit very strongly from the first few blessings of the series. Nonetheless, I think what I've done, even with that proviso, is to say that even us experienced, mature, streetwise folks who probably have some inkling about what might be good, positive, wholesome in life as compared with the opposite, can still learn something from this, because although we might not externalize the bad influences in our life or suffer so much from people around us who might influence us in a bad way, we still have that voice inside ourselves which can still be a bad influence. So many of these things can be interpreted as not just pointing the finger at other people around us who are a bad influence, who we might avoid associating with, but also the side of our own self, our own demons that sometimes are clamoring for our attention. But the ones which I've already talked about over the last few weeks are avoiding people who are a bad influence and trying to get closer to those who are a good influence on us. So basically choosing a good and noble set of friends of the sort who would look out for us. But today we come to number 3 of the blessings, which is more to do with who we idolize or who we might try to emulate. The tagline is the hero in one's heart. And the interesting thing about these sorts of ideas in the present day is that sometimes the influences in our lives, they're not physically there. They're in the media, they are in the books, they are in the things we buy, the status symbols, this sort of thing. It's actually quite, it's a teaching that has not gone out of date very much at all. So we're looking at the effect of a role model in one's formation of an idea about a direction in life for something wholesome, especially as we are turning our back on any possible bad habits that we have had in our life so far. So, a person's future relies very much on their ability to judge the difference between good and bad habits. But what they would consider normal, well, it might come from their friends, but it certainly comes from the sort of thing or people whose example they idolize. And although people might look superficially very similar, but the influences on people's lives can influence them to direct their efforts and their energies and their skills in very different ways depending on who they idolize. So, although you might think about it in terms of sucking up to people who you idolize, these days it might be something much more simple, like retweeting their tweets, or hitting the like button for a celebrity, or platforming or no platforming certain speakers. You know, these days it hasn't gone out of fashion at all. As children, maybe the only real heroes in our heart are the ones that we see often, maybe within the walls of our own homes. So we idolize our parents, and anything our parents do is like sort of sacred, and we try to emulate them in every possible way. Our own parents' standards of justice in life will be the ones that we try to adopt as well. If they get angry about things, then we will get angry about things. But later on, as we get into our teens, then maybe our horizons will be widened outside of the home, and the influence of constructive or destructive role models will be more unpredictable. But the effect of role models on teenagers is more than just their friends. These days it goes a lot further than that. But if you look at the array of celebrities who are offered to us, you find that many of those who are celebrated are not actually particularly exemplary. And this particular graphic comes from an addiction website, where the little symbols on each of those deceased celebrities shows the particular cause of death for those celebrities who met an early death. So whether it's Vincent van Gogh or Kurt Cobain, Marilyn Monroe, Janis Joplin, Dylan Thomas, Jimi Hendrix, Elvis Presley, Jim Morrison, Keith Moon, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, or Brian Jones, you might come to the conclusion, if you are not very savvy, that truly creative people are too beautiful for this world. Or you might come to the conclusion that creative writers drank because of the pressure of fame, or that suicide is a good way to ensure fame. And if you have conclusions like that, it would blinker you to the reality of so-called celebrities, in some cases where the rather brutal and banal nature of their addictions is very different from what we associate with their work or their creations. So someone like Vincent van Gogh may have been a beautiful person when he had a paintbrush in his hand, but for most of the rest of the time he was rather a sorrowful person. So what we're trying to do with Blessings of Life is maybe to look for the qualities in the sort of person whose example might be a true inspiration to us, like 360 degrees, instead of just in the small part of their work that we see shown and displayed. And a reliable role model often comes down to the worldview of that person, the way they see the world, the sort of assumptions which they have about the world. And within the context of Buddhism, the technical name for this sort of worldview is something known as right view, which you probably will have heard about if you've ever studied about the Eightfold Path. Yes? But there's a lot of conjecture about what right view actually means. Some people think that if you believe you don't exist, then that's right view. If you don't believe in yourself, that's right view. Sort of nihilism. Right view? Well, according to this, it's something completely different. And where I've got this from is actually from what the Buddha said. So what he said was people who could be considered to have right view, it is 10 things: valuing generosity, valuing welfare work, valuing those worthy of respect, which is what we're talking about today, acknowledging karmic retribution of action, acknowledging the reality of this world, acknowledging the reality of the next life, so that death is not the end of the story, repaying a debt of gratitude to one's parents, the value of that, the existence of spontaneously arising beings, which means beings beyond the naked eye. And that enlightenment can be achieved if you practice properly. Yes? So that would be what would be considered right view. Someone with those sorts of views would likely be the sort of person, if you emulate them, then they will, some of those views will brush off on you as well. So a positive or an uplifting view of purpose in life. So if you ask yourself what having a hero or a good example to follow does for you, what you actually do is you allocate more bandwidth in your heart and mind for people like them. We put their picture on the wall when we speak about them. We speak about them in glowing terms. We take every opportunity to learn their opinions and try to have the similar opinions. We try to meet with them, imitate what they do in their lives. Some people even go to great lengths to dress like them. So these outward aspects of emulating those people who we have great respect for would be called paying respect or expressing respect. So the sort of thing which you can see outwardly. What is unexpressed would mean the attitude a person has which leads them to do those sorts of behavior. So the respect a person has is different from expressing the respect that you have. True? Respect is really, it's an attitude of mind. It's a sort of looking for the goodness in another person. But how you actually express that feeling towards the things or people who you respect, well, that is another matter. And as this is a fairly basic and a starter blessing amongst the 38, then what we're talking about today is not so much the attitude of respect as the expressing of it. True respect, so the attitude, and this is, we'll look at this more a little bit further down the line, is to do with a person actively looking for the good points in another person rather than trying to find faults with them. And it would be the sort of thing which they would do both in a person's presence or behind their back. There is an inbuilt weakness which all of us seem to have, which is to forget about good things while focusing on negative things. Some people say it's a sort of survival instinct to always focus on the negative and the dangerous and the nasty things in life, because if you pay attention to them, then those nasty things won't kill you quite as easily. Whether it's the sort of saber-toothed tiger lurking outside your cave or whatever, if you remember how dangerous it is, then you tend to survive longer. But respect teaches us the opposite, is that we must look even in things which are imperfect for the things which are good in those things, and try to learn from those and incorporate those good things in ourselves. That would be the true meaning of respect. Even for things like meditation, unfortunately, because we tend to focus on the easy, the simple, and the lazy things in life, is that even though you might have learnt the method today, but by tomorrow it starts to get a little bit hazier, and although you know meditating 20 minutes a day is good for you, but like you start cutting corners already because you feel that just sort of sitting and relaxing was about the same as meditation anyway, so why not just sit around and relax and maybe put the TV on as well? And before long you find that all your good intentions have gone out of your mind completely. So it's like our mind gives disproportionate weight to the more negative things unless we make an effort otherwise. And this effort we're talking about is to do with an attitude of respect, or maybe expressing that respect as a way to manifest it and make it easier for us to remember. If you're talking about raising children, then really what you like those children to have is an attitude of respect, to be able to look for good in everything around them. But that goodness is actually quite abstract. And if you're talking about a 5-year-old or whatever, or maybe younger than that, then just pointing out how great something is not really going to sink very far into their consciousness. What I've noticed from how Buddhists bring up their children is that, unlike you folks who maybe get a babysitter or whatever, is that they bring their children, even quite young ones, along to the temple with them. And you might think, well, isn't that rather thoughtless? Aren't children going to cry and run about and disturb everyone else? Well, they don't think like that, and it's not because they are inconsiderate. They think that no matter how young the child is, they're going to benefit something from visiting the temple. So what do when they get here? Well, they sit them down in front of the big Buddha statue. It's quite big for a child. And they make sure that they bow. Or they make sure that they show respect by doing this. And you might wonder, oh, isn't that just like bullying your child into sort of some submissive behavior? Well, it probably is. But because it's an action of their body, then the children remember it. And they remember a respectful posture and connect it with this statue of someone they've never seen before, this Buddha statue. And little by little, they get used to this being something which they do when they come to the temple. So they bow and then they go and run about. Or they bow and then they go and make some noise somewhere. But whatever they do, when they arrive, they bow, and when they go home, they bow again. And at some point in that child's maturation, they'll start to think rebelliously to themselves, oh, here we go again, we're bowing. How come I need to show respect to this big Buddha statue? And at that point, the question arises in their mind that they have to start looking for something to make this bowing action of theirs worthwhile. At which point it stimulates the true aspect of respect inside themselves, which has sort of developed out of this simple expression of respect. Yeah? And it could be said that for people who are really not so spiritually mature, then starting with a physical expression of respect leads to a deeper understanding of what is to be respected in a person that you are showing that respect for. So within Buddhism, it said that there are two sorts of respect. Both can be genuine, but the first is showing respect through gifts, or maybe expressions of respect, and the second is respect through practice. The first one is called Amisa Puja, and the second one is called Patipati Puja. In various contexts, then, different sorts of respect may be more or less appropriate. But as with Buddhist lists of various sorts, generally anything that comes at the end of the list would be considered the superior or more important one. And this is why for things like paying respect to the Buddha or to a monk or whatever, then homage through practice would probably be the more valuable one. So how would you show your respect for the Buddha? You think about what the Buddha has taught you and you put those things into practice. So maybe the actual expression for the Buddha is not the more important one. Whereas in other situations, like here we see a picture of the children showing respect for their school teacher, bringing a gift for the teacher might actually be more appropriate than saying to the teacher, oh, I've put into practice everything you've taught me. My handwriting's better or whatever. But who knows? But the priority given to the two may differ in different situations, but both require respect. So generally within Buddhism, there are categories of people considered worthy of respect. But sometimes I should warn you that it becomes something which we have to talk about, because if we are just left to the follow the meaning given to Buddha statues by, let's say, garden centers, or in this picture, Sainsbury's, we might be forgiven for thinking that the Buddha is about the same as like a garden gnome, and maybe I think there's even garden mushrooms there as well. Same category. It's like, oh, yet another thing to put on my water feature in my garden or whatever, and without really looking any deeper. So these things, it's left to the monks to have to talk about these things. Otherwise, left to Sainsbury's, probably the Buddha would be relegated. Well, he's got a higher shelf in Sainsbury's in this particular case. Generally speaking, the Buddha would be respected because of three qualities which the Buddha exemplified during his life, which are the qualities of wisdom, compassion, and purity. Three major things which we would be able to learn from the Buddha and take away and put into practice. So how was he wise? Well, he was able to single-handedly attain enlightenment, which no one before him managed to do that. How did he exemplify compassion? Well, he sacrificed the remainder of his life after his enlightenment to teach what he'd learned for the benefit of other people so they could follow in his footsteps. As for purity, generally this means the practice of self-discipline through keeping precepts or following monastic rules very carefully. So these would be the reasons why the Buddhists would hold the Buddha in respect, not just to have a jolly decoration for one's home or one's garden. In our meditation centers, whether people like it or not, at least they are invited to pay respect to the Buddha at the beginning of the session and at the end of the session. But if we bow without any sort of sense or attitude of respect in our mind to accompany the action, then it will do us no more good than a yoga exercise. Maybe we'll get more subtle if we bow a lot. But really, the reason for bowing goes much deeper. It ought to be reflection on those three virtues of the Buddha. If you bow 3 times, then the first time you can think about the wisdom of the Buddha and maybe how you've incorporated that wisdom into your own life. You bow a second time, you think about the compassion of the Buddha, and then think about how you might have incorporated compassion into your life. Bow for a third time and think about the purity of the Buddha, and maybe reflect on the purity of your own precepts. And that would be a way of bowing that would bring you true benefit instead of just helping to make you more supple. The monastic community are also singled out for respect, whether or not they have reached transcendental attainments. So some monks may be enlightened already, some may not be enlightened already, but whether they are or not, that we pay respect to them anyway. It's considered that even monks who are working to become enlightened are still worthy of respect because they have made certain sacrifices to allow that to happen. So, especially those who teach, and really clergy in general, those who make those sacrifices to exemplify what they teach, so they're not hypocritical, they help to guide us or give advice. then those are worthy of our special treatment and respect. It's said that there are 6 duties which any member, a spiritual mentor or monk or clergy needs to practice in order to be worth their salt. And these include cautioning others against unwholesome behaviors. So if no one else says it, then the clergy ought to. Encouraging them to be more virtuous, ministering with compassion, teaching new or beneficial things, so they ought to have something new to teach you each time. Not like, oh, here's the monk, he's only got one talk, he gives it every time they come. If the monk repeats the talk, then they ought to go in more detail the next time round, maybe expand on what they taught you last time, and they ought to point the way towards heaven. Generally, in the Buddhist teachings, and this comes from the Sigalovada Sutta, they only give people 5 duties. But for monks, they give the monks 6 duties, so it means that they have to work a little bit harder than everyone else to fulfill all their duties in life. Also up for respect, apart from monks and Buddhas and so on, are pretty much anyone in society who makes great personal sacrifices for the benefit of others. And this might be those in public positions, these days, MPs never know they're going to be attacked when they have surgeries for their electorate. So I would say that they are making quite a big sacrifice. I haven't got to the point where people are leaving me death threats yet, but I believe that seems to be normal for those in public office these days. I think it must take quite a toll on you. Parents, I think you would agree, are generally those who make big sacrifices. So parents are usually earmarked for a special respect within Buddhist culture. Teachers, as long as they are not doing it just for the money, but they exemplify as well as teach. So they are a good example to their pupils or students, as well as just passing along the knowledge. Those who are in positions of influence ought to conform with something known as the 10-fold virtues of a monarch if they are in public office. So whether they're a king or a president or a mayor or whatever, they ought to have certain qualities to which they abide by. I'm not going to go into it too much today, just saying that this exists, this sort of a set of guidelines for people who are thinking of going into such office. But things like not losing your temper and not being vengeful and that sort of thing ought to come as part of the job description. If you are unable to conform with those, then maybe you should not go run for office. Yes. Strangely, there are also inanimate objects which are considered worthy of respect. Can you think of any? In Buddhist context, things which deserve respect. I'm not talking about Buddha statues, like real, just like objects. Scriptures. Can you think of any other things? Well, I will enlighten you. Pagodas are particularly well respected in the Buddhist context. You know pagodas? No? Well, they look like that. And that one was from Burma, very famous one called Shwedagon. Well, then the stupas, sometimes they're known as stupas, sometimes they're known as dagobas, chaitiyas. They have different names for them depending on the country you're talking about. But really, the reason why these strange monuments are respected is down to what's inside them, what they enshrine. And there are four things, sorts of pagodas depending on what's inside them. And that's what makes them worthy of people's respect. So, some are relic pagodas. So they have Buddhist relics inside them. So this is another reason that Buddhists tend to get along well with Catholics. Some are filled with scriptures. Some are filled with Buddha statues, and some are at a particular location which is considered a Buddhist holy site, something often to do with the life, particular events in the life of the Buddha. Yeah. So, how do you get relics? Well, if a Buddha or a Pacceka Buddha or an Arahant passes away, or even a universal monarch, which is sort of a very virtuous monarch, after the cremation, generally you would be left with just ashes. Yeah? And you would be unable to tell the differences between a human cremation and a goat being cremated. But for those of very high virtue, there's something new that arises in those ashes, which is more than just carbon. And often it takes the form of little pearl-like objects. Sometimes it's almost like jewels of some sort, semi-precious stones. And those are collected together as a mark of the particular purity which that person must have had, because they don't occur for your common garden person. Those are collected together and then they are enshrined in a pagoda. So that is how those relics come into being. So for the Buddha, for example, those relics were enshrined in a pagoda or many pagodas, and people who are unable to express their respect for the Buddha, who's no longer alive, express their respect at the pagoda instead. So those would be called relic pagodas. So the holy sites of Buddhism, some people actually go on pilgrimage to them out of respect. Place of birth, place where he became enlightened, place where he gave his first teaching, place where he passed away. Four main ones which are marked by pagodas. And even the Buddha said that if a person went around those four places with faith in their heart, then they would have a good rebirth for sure. The third sort is the Dhamma Chaitya, which is that which contains Dhamma teachings, maybe books or scriptures. So it's like almost like a library, you might say, a place for the safe storage of scriptures. And last but not least is what's known as Udesika Chaitya, which is one which has many Buddha statues, rather like the one which we have at our main temple in Thailand. How would you show respect for a pagoda? Ideas? Bowing. So just as you might bow to the Buddha when he's alive, you can bow to a pagoda. However, there's a culture surrounding pagodas that often people circumambulate them, which means walking around them with the hands together in a gesture of respect 3 times. In some countries, they are quite strict about removing one's shoes before coming into the sanctuary surrounding a pagoda. So beware if you are being a tourist in one of those countries. And some places they even go as far as saying you should avoid standing on the shadow of the pagoda. Yeah, that's usually a bit stricter than our lot. But I've heard of that in places like Burma. Some things like the objects associated with a particular respected person, the robes or the bowl, are sometimes treated with respect even though the person isn't wearing them. And other inanimate objects are things like the teachings of the Buddha. When they're written down, the books of them, something like a chanting book, for example, rather like maybe a Bible, I guess, or a Quran. They're quite finicky about how to treat them, right? It shouldn't be left lying around, shouldn't be folded in half and shoved in one's back pocket, shouldn't be handled with dirty hands or put down on a dusty surface, and other objects should not be placed on top of them. And they shouldn't be crumpled, have pages torn out, or marked with pen. Yeah. Some things not worthy of respect. Fools from Blessing Number 1. You would want to no platform them, perhaps. The work of fools. We use fools in a fairly sort of gentle way here. Objects that lead to foolishness, things connected with superstitions. I don't mean like Harry Potter books or whatever. I know some religions object to Harry Potter. But more things like maybe Ouija boards, or like homemade casino items would not be worthy of respect. So, quick story to finish off with, to illustrate this idea of expressing respect. Once upon a time, according to the Dhammapada, verse 68, to illustrate a story about good deeds not bringing regret at a later time, in the royal palace of a king called Bimbisara in ancient India, there was a particular group of courtiers who specialized in arranging the flowers in the palace. And the head of the flower arrangers was called Sumana, so hence Sumana the Garland-Maker. And he used to arrange all the flowers to decorate the palace, to decorate the throne room, decorate the king's bedchamber, and give all these places a delightful fragrance. And he'd worked for many years in the palace, and he'd always done a good job. But one day, in the season where flowers were very scarce, Sumana had to go into town to look for any flowers at all that could be used in the royal palace. And every last flower, according to the rights of the king, would need to be requisitioned by the king. But even with all these powers of the king, there was hardly any flowers to be found. They were very rare indeed. And the maximum flowers he could get that day were 8 meager handfuls of flowers in order to take back to the palace. So he got his 8 little handfuls of flowers, and he was on his way back to the palace when who should cross his path but the Buddha on his arms round. And normally Sumana was sort of slightly faithful in the Buddha, but he'd never really done anything to show for it. And he thought to himself, if I bring my meager number of flowers back to the palace, the best I can get is sort of a few words of praise from the king. But what if I were out of faith to offer these flowers to the Buddha instead? Even if the king punishes me, even if I were to risk my life, because you never know with kings if you're going to get your head chopped off, still, if I leave this world, I will leave this world a happy man. So thinking that, he gave all the flowers to the Buddha. And the Buddha saw how much faith Sumana had in order to dare to make that choice. So he used his mental powers to create a little miracle by which the flowers which he had sprinkled at the Buddha's feet actually floated up in the sky and followed him around like a cloud. So wherever the Buddha went that day, then these flowers would follow along behind him in the air. And everyone came out of their houses to see this amazing sight. Sumana, of course, was well impressed. He thought, if the king chops off my head, it's been worth it today. Meanwhile, his wife was not so happy about this. His wife started worrying about what's going to happen when the king learns about this. So before the news reached the king, she quickly asked for an audience and said, I want a divorce on the spot. Anything that happens to my husband, I want nothing to do with it. So the king said, okay, well, you want a divorce? Have it. And then a few moments later, the news came that there's no flowers today, but all the flowers that were intended for your family happen to be following the Buddha around, flying through the air. And the king himself thought, ooh, this must be Sumana's doing. But I want to see these flowers too. So how about inviting the Buddha for lunch in our palace today? So the Buddha came and the flowers followed him into the palace. He ate his lunch, gave the blessing, and then the flowers followed him all the way back to the temple. And then only at the temple gate did they all settle down on the ground in a big heap, and everyone was even more impressed by that. And the king thought, wow, Sumana certainly, he's not one to be frightened of making merit. And such a person is the sort of person I would like to reward, not punish. And it turned out that he gave to Sumana 8 different prizes of various sorts. And unfortunately, as his wife had already divorced him earlier that day, she got none of it. Because she'd run for it long before then. But this sort of goes to show that simple expressions of respect, if made with a very high amount of attitude of respect or great courage, can lead to rewards far beyond what you would expect. So I just finish off with a few little announcements. The classes here take place every Tuesday evening between 7 and 8:30, and every Thursday between 7 and 9. The Thursday evening generally has more on Buddhist stuff and a slightly longer meditation. If you've got friends who are beginners and might be frightened off by long meditations, then generally Tuesday would be the day to come. Saying that, I will give you advance warning, not for next Thursday, but the Thursday after. So Thursday the 19th, 18th, that unfortunately we have been descended upon by the local cub troop. So if you come, you can meditate, but it'll probably be for about 10 minutes. And you may also be roped into being volunteers to help take those cubs around to give them their temple visit. So if you are amenable to that, and then it would actually be very helpful for you to join us on that day. But unfortunately, they have no other day they can come, so it clashes. Also online, we run every Saturday a meditation and little wisdom talk in English, which you can access via Zoom, for those of you who don't want to go out in the cold and the rain. And that happens every Saturday evening between 7 and 8 p.m. Also, we run on Full Moon Day, we try to do something special. This time it's going to be on Saturday the 20th of November. So it will be on Zoom too, but we'll also do it in person on the Saturday, in case and if you are able to come. As we now have a pond, then we're going to make full use of the pond this year to float the candle lanterns known as loikatong, which in the Thai tradition, where you float away the candle raft on the waters as a symbol of letting go of all your worries. And there'll be a little talk about, after the meditation, about letting go of the things you're worried about. So join us online for that on the 20th of November, or in person if you would like to actually see how to float a candle lantern on the pond. Yes, we try to get ones that the fish won't object to. And last but not least, even offline, there's also an app which has been used to gather together all the audio tracks for meditation and instruction, and also theory and background for meditation, which you can download for free for iOS or for Android. And even if you're offline, you can still use your mobile phone to listen to as you're meditating. And it's got a lot of tracks from myself, but also several other monks speaking English on there too. So that's called Minded Gem. But for today, I think I will leave it there. I've actually managed to run out of time today. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those at this point. Yes, Maria. Well, for a child, it's very hard to distinguish. Generally, as a child, you have to work with what you have. I don't think you have much choice in the matter anyway. But at the point where you can start to see that the example you're getting is not healthy for you, then you would need to be selective about what you let brush off on you. And really the whole purpose of these 38 blessings is to learn how to do that, so that you can have a sort of preferential picking up of habits from the people you're closest to. Your parents must have something good about them. Maybe they've got 99 things wrong with them, maybe they've got one good thing, but make sure you get that one good thing from them. How you actually treat your parents, well, you know, if they're hardened criminals, what can you do? You don't become a hardened criminal out of respect to your parents to sort of keep the family tradition going. But you might visit them in prison, or you might bring them cake in prison or something, out of a sense of gratitude that you're there at all, even if they've not been very great as a parent, but you know, you're nice to them for what they have done that's right for you. In Buddhism, children, however they're treated after they're born, still feel they have a debt of gratitude to their parents, simply for being brought into the world at all, which is seen as a huge and a precious opportunity. Sometimes it's not really reflected on very much in other traditions, because you think, I didn't ask to be born or whatever, and you know, I don't want to be a human anyway. But if you look deeply and realize how great an opportunity it is to be alive and kicking and able to do so much in this world, maybe you realize what you owe your parents more. But parents who are imperfect, well, you know, no one's perfect. If we were perfect, we wouldn't be here in the first place. But how to pick up on the positive aspects and protect yourself from anything that is negative as soon as you become aware that those things are damaging for you. Because they're your parents. So they deserve something special.